Okay. Hi, everyone. This is not the way I usually do lives. I'm normally sitting at home in my office. But as we know, life happens, and I had a little bit of a mix-up in terms of my schedule today, and I'm grateful for Shevi's being able to accommodate. So we're sitting here doing this live in my car, and I'm taking a page from Shevi. Shevi, I'm in my car and you're not in your car. So
this is so off-brand. Okay. I'm in an office. It's so weird. What am I doing here?
Right. So I'm normally in the office. And
I
you're
know.
normally in
I
the
feel
car.
so professional right now.
Okay. So it seems like we're switching places. And so I think we'll
Yay.
just go with it.
Okay.
Because
can you see me normally? Because you know I don't normally do lives.
Yes.
I'm like propped up. Okay.
Yes, I can see you perfectly normally. Your face is right in the screen and you're good.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay.
Okay. So I just want to thank everyone who's here. This live came out of this huge push from a lot of different people, and sort of the overwhelming responses that I got to the discussion of Niddah that kind of exploded on this page. And I actually really wasn't prepared for it. And I frankly, I should have been, but I wasn't. But once it was there, I knew it had to be said, it had to be done, and it had to be done appropriately. And I wanted to give voice to all of the different people who are coming at it from very different perspectives. Right. And so I did, and I posted as many responses as I could that were sort of on topic and that brought out different aspects of this. Right. But I was left, and I think a lot of people, as I've been told, we're left with this feeling of being just very unsettled by the entire conversation. And specifically Sarah Rivka Cohn, who's a dear friend of mine, and I know also a dear friend of yours, right? From Shleime's, from Link, Shleime's Club. Right. So she recommended that I reach out to you, and so here we are, because you are the voice of reason, you are the voice of knowledge, and you are the voice of so much, and people look to you for guidance in this area and in so many other areas. And so I thank you. Thank you for coming. And you know, I'm going to let you talk. I mean, we do have specific things that that we talked about that we want to cover. Right. But I want to mention, and I know you're going to mention first as well, that this talk and this live is meant to be for anyone who wants it, and for anyone who feels that this is something that's important to them, that something that this is meaningful for them. If this doesn't speak to you, if you are doing your own thing, if you're not observing, however you're observing, whatever you're doing, then continue doing that. This talk, basically, it presupposes a certain baseline of knowledge and a certain baseline of observance. And our hope is that you come away from this talk feeling a little bit more inspired and not as upset,
victimized.
Yes, exactly. All those things. So, okay, now I'm going to be quiet, and now I'm going to let you go.
Okay. So just to reiterate, I'm of course not a rabbinic authority. So anything that we're discussing and I'm presenting today is it's meant to be educational, but it does not take the place of like a psak or any kind of, halachic suspension or anything like that. So I strongly encourage people to clarify different things, with their rabbi. If you're still left after this kind of like unsure in terms of like even just practically how you should be conducting yourself, to please clarify that, halachic position with your own personal rabbinic authority. So, we're just here to like educate and, like you said, potentially inspire, potentially inform. And yes, to reiterate, this is not coming from a place of like, we don't have an agenda other than
Correct.
to just offer information. And then it's up to anybody listening if you want to, you know, access that information, or if you want to look into it further, clarify further, please do. But we're not in any way trying to shame anybody or guilt anybody.
Exactly.
Judaism is not an all or nothing, you know, kind of a thing. Religion, it's just not like that. Our practice is not like that. So, you know, anybody who feels like this is like too much, or, you know, too overwhelming, or just makes them feel bad, that's not the point.
Correct.
So yes,
Yes.
that's the baseline.
Correct. Okay. So the first thing, I know there were 4 different real points that you wanted to talk about. So I'm just going to hit on like 1 or 2 sentences and let you go.
Yeah. Okay.
So the first thing you wanted to talk about was tuma, like the feeling that the concept of impurity, and how this is a time of physical inaccessibility, a time for personal reflection, not punishment. So,
right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I'm really relying on your prompts.
It's all good. I've got them all right here, so it's all good.
Amazing. So yes, when we try and take a concept like tuma, which in English we translate as impurity, or actually I believe it's the St. James Bible which translates it as unclean, which is one of the saddest things that has ever happened to our perspective on tuma, because we do associate it with cleanliness, or we do associate it with, it's like a personal reflection on somehow like our behavior. It's a response to our behavior. Now, that's not never true, meaning the kind of tuma that a person will experience when they are afflicted with taharas, right? Which is, how do you say taharas in English? Leprosy, right? Thank you. Okay. And that is a response to a personal choice that they made. And in that case, it could potentially be perceived as a punishment, although I would say that it's more like, you know, like a natural or logical consequence of their behavior. But the tuma that we experience with Niddah is not like that at all. There are a set of biological circumstances that are prescribed by halacha. And when women find themselves in that, like in those parameters, the like logical outcome of that is what we call tuma. Now, tuma goes so much deeper than just pure or impure. Whenever we find tuma, we find the result of tuma is a physical inaccessibility. Now, I want to really emphasize the fact that it's a physical inaccessibility, because it's not an emotional or a spiritual or an intellectual inaccessibility. And it relates to either marriage or to the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, so we no longer have a Beis HaMikdash. Actually, when you really look at, you know, Jewish marriage and a lot of the like fundamental ideas that go into it, there's a lot of parallel between Har HaBayis / the Mikdash and a Jewish marriage. But that's like not for now.
Correct.
Maybe we can discuss it a different time.
Yes.
Nowadays, we associate it so strongly with marriage because most of us are not bringing karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash. If you are, please tell me how. I would love to partake, but most of us do not like that. I mean, not most of us, none of us. That's not our reality today. Right. So then we're left with this kind of like expression of an expression of an expression. And the human experience is that because of all of the narrative around it and a lot of misconception, it makes us feel bad about ourselves, right? But that's not actually what tuma is supposed to do. It's not, okay, Bracha's laughing at me. Bracha, you're allowed to pop in and like to correct me. Okay. So that's not actually the purpose of tuma. It's a response to our biological reality. We also, I should add that in halacha, there is a concept of lo plug, which means that something is true across the board, whether or not you are the exception to the rule. So halacha will state a number of parameters, and if a woman finds herself within those parameters, she is potentially in a state of tuma, which is a spiritual state. But she may find that she's the exception to that rule, and yet all of the parameters of tuma will still apply to her. So there are times where that works to our benefit, and there are times where we really find ourselves kind of like getting the short end of the stick. And I think that especially around Niddah post-loss, Niddah when someone is struggling with infertility, which feels that doesn't just feel frequent, it is frequent. Or it feels very long, it is very long.
Month after month after month.
Yes,
after month.
exactly. And even post-loss, I will also say even postpartum, right? Even after like the blessing of a baby, we can still feel very isolated by Niddah. So that kind of leads me to my next point, which is what we discussed about, you know, feelings not being facts. So I don't want to get too much into like the mental health side of that because I'm not a therapist, but the fact that we feel this way about Niddah does not necessarily mean that it's true. Meaning it's true that this is our reality and this is our experience and this is how we feel, and nobody is going to try and like diminish that. That's how your feelings are feelings. Like you can't really do anything about that, right? But that doesn't mean that that was actually the purpose of Niddah. It's not like Hashem's like, ooh, she's feeling miserable. Yes, mission accomplished. That's what I had in mind all along. I'm trying to make something awful even worse for her. Ha ha ha. Right? Like,
it's not right. It's not like I want to be clear, and this is what we're talking about. And just like it's not, Niddah is not meant to be a punishment.
Right.
It's not like. And being a Niddah, and also your infertility or God forbid a loss, is also not meant to be a punishment.
Right. And the fact that it can sometimes feel that way is 100% like human and normal, and you're not bad for feeling that way. Of course, like we feel what we feel, and we can sometimes, especially in a culture where it seems like everyone else has access to something that like it is not being offered to us, it can feel like, you know, hello. So I'm really not diminishing that, but kind of going back to my first point again, I'm going to jump back and forth a lot about Niddah not only not being a punishment, but actually being an opportunity for something else. So as much as it's a state of physical inaccessibility, right, it's also an opportunity for something. It's an opportunity for something in your relationship with your husband, and it's an opportunity for something in your relationship with yourself and in your relationship with Hashem. So I kind of mentioned, right, there's physical inaccessibility, but we also have emotional, spiritual, and intellectual accessibility to our marriage, to ourselves, and to Hashem, right? So a lot of times I have my theories as to kind of why this is the way it is, and why we have certain expectations of, you know, the laws of family purity. I've heard people say things like, oh, if you keep these laws, like you'll be very happily married. Like this is the key. And I'm like, I don't know. I know a lot of people who are very observant and very unhappy. And I know plenty of people who are not observant, and I'm looking at their relationship and I'm like, looks pretty good, right? So there's a lot of narrative and a lot of kind of like, we somehow put this area of observance on a certain pedestal. I have my theories as to why, but again, we're not going to go into it right now.
Next slide.
Next slide, exactly, to be continued. This is going to be a series.
Clearly.
But the truth is that when we present it in that way, it's really such a disservice to what Niddah could potentially be. We focus so much on what's not available to us when we're in Niddah that sometimes we fail to recognize and really take advantage of the opportunities that are there. Now, I understand. It's almost like, you know, we're like, you know, somebody saying to you, okay, you're supposed to have like the same kind of connection, or sometimes even a deeper connection, but we're just going to like remove one of your like expressions of affection at this time. We're just going to like take one hand and tie it behind your back, but now do better than you did before. So it's normal to feel like your marriage is kind of like operating at a certain disadvantage during this time. And especially when you're already feeling vulnerable or hormonal or just emotional over the circumstances that brought you here. Of course, it's very complex. So we're acknowledging that, but at the same time offering that perhaps a shift in how we perceive why we got here and how we got here can really help us maximize this time. And as much as many women, and I've personally had this experience, will express, you know, their frustration and their kind of like whatever feelings it might be, right? Just, but the difficult feelings around being in Niddah at a difficult time. A lot of women have expressed to me, and like I said, I've had, you know, degrees of this experience where not that they're not a silver lining per se, but with a shift in perspective, sometimes you can really gain a deeper appreciation for why we have this time that we have, as difficult as it is. And it can be both. It can be very difficult, and we can also appreciate the opportunity that exists within it, right? Some things that women have said to me, for example, as much as like I really wanted, some degree of physical connection with my husband, I was also like very appreciative to like have the time to heal and have the time to really kind of like go inside myself and not have that pressure. And it wasn't like, it had to be any kind of conversation of like, are we, aren't we? Because like Kallah came and kind of decided for us that like, this is not available to you now, etc. Again, I'm not saying that wasn't your experience, that somehow like you're doing something wrong. We're just offering like a different perspective.
And I think what's important here, and I love the way you describe that, is that, I look, I'm only speaking for myself here, but I hear a lot from other women that, I always, like, people always said, like, oh yeah, like, it's good to give yourself a break because, like, then he'll know that there are times that are inaccessible, and then he won't be needing you all the time, and you can have yours. Like there's a lot of
not a child. You're married to an adult male.
There's like a lot of narrative, I feel like, that a lot of us got when we were going through Kallah classes, or when we were early stages in our marriage.
Right.
And then, as time moves on and one experiences different things in your marriage, I feel like for me personally, my relationship and my attitude towards Niddah has changed.
Right.
And I think that, I think that looking at it and thinking about it exactly from your perspective, just trying to sort of take a big picture perspective on this is, I think, makes it more accessible at the times that it's hard. And at the times that it's hard, it's really hard. Like,
and by the way, I think I said this to you, I would never wish upon anybody for Niddah not to be hard for them.
Correct. Like, I wanted you to say that also, right here.
Like when girls say to me, like, we're learning and Kallahs or young women or not young women, right, who are getting married, and they're like learning all about these laws, and they're like, this sounds really hard. And I'm like, I hope that you will never reach a point in your marriage when you're like, whatever, I don't even care. Like, I hope, my bracket to you is that it will be very difficult,
Yes.
And that is in and of itself like a potentially good sign. I also, of course, hope that you and your husband will, develop the skills and, the strength and whatever else necessary to be able to implement that to whatever degree in your marriage. But I'm not, no, it shouldn't be easy.
Correct. It shouldn't be easy.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be easy. Okay. Two more points.
Yes.
One is, you wanted to talk about how it's not halakha's job to cater to us.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a little bit of like a harsh-ish point, but I think it's really important. So a lot of times we will encounter, different areas of halakha. And again, especially in the areas where we've put so much pressure on how this observance is going to somehow make our life better. Okay. But in other areas of observance where we don't have that pressure, it's somehow easier. Like, nobody is expecting, observing the laws of kosher to keep them in like optimal nutritional state. Do you know what I'm saying? Nobody's like, well, I'm keeping
what
kosher.
You're saying?
So
You're saying the kugel and the cholent and like extra like desserts we have on Shabbos, that's not helpful? Okay.
Exactly. No, but like, no, we don't even have that expectation that like, oh, these dietary laws are going to ensure that I am, consuming the, ideal diet. We don't have that expectation. But somehow when it comes to our interpersonal, laws, we really do have that expectation. We're like, well, if I do this, shouldn't it and somehow benefit me? Like, I'm not feeling it, right? And that's what I mean when I say that it's not halakha's job to cater to us. It's kind of, the responsibility is on us to, yes, look at something potentially very challenging, but to kind of figure out like, okay, how am I going to navigate this? Because the benefit won't necessarily be something that I can perceive or access right now. Now, that's not to say that there are never areas where halakha does bend to our circumstances, for sure. I mean, that's a heter, right? And I want to really emphasize also over here that if a rabbinic authority gives gives you a specific sock, right, or ruling for your situation.
Yep.
And in another person's situation, we might consider that, you know, like vis-a-vis, like, oh, that's not really ideal.
Right.
Please understand that if a rabbi is telling you that that's what benefits your situation, that becomes your ideal. So a lot of the, like, so sometimes I'll hear that from women. They'll say, like, oh, our rabbi told us this and this, but like, isn't that like lenient? Like, we don't want the easy way out.
Isn't it cheating? Right.
Isn't it cheating? Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, I mean, I have a whole explanation of why it's not cheating, which we don't really have time for, but like, I just want to mention that point. So I think that in general, the way we view Jewish law in general, is that our go-to is that it's restrictive, right? And I would like to propose that it's more preservative than restrictive. Now, in the moment when you're being preserved, that can feel extremely uncomfortable, and that can even feel restrictive. The example that I always give my students is like, have you ever watched any, like, or even done it yourself? But when you preserve lemons, for example, I don't know if you've ever done this, if you've ever seen it.
Okay.
But basically what you do is you really pack the mason jar as tight as possible. You're salting the lemon so that like all of the juice can really come out of the lemon, and then you're really packing it as tightly as possible. And then the first few days before you just kind of let it sit and do its preserving thing, every day you're opening the jar and you're squeezing more lemons into it so that there's really no space around it. Because if there's space around it, then that will just, I mean, I don't know what it'll do. I guess spoil or something, right? Like, I don't know. This is where, like, I love the
show. Okay,
yeah, I don't know what happens. We can ask Danielle Renoff. But basically, initially, right? And can you imagine if you're the lemon at the bottom of your jar and you're like, no more, I can't take it. And it's like, no, this is so that you don't spoil, right? So again, I mean, the mashal is not the nimshal. It's not perfect. But a lot of times, you know, preservation and restriction can feel the same. But the intent is super important, right? So Hashem's intention is not to like restrict us and squeeze us and just be like more and more. I just want you to suffer more and more and more, right? It's a preservation of something. Every single Jewish law has the spiritual foundation and undertone and like, you know, motivation behind it, and then there's the practical observance of it. And not always in the practical observance will we easily be able to access the like the motivation, the underlying motivation for it, but that doesn't mean that it's not there.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, this, and I think that piece is extremely important, and that also talks about sort of this big picture piece of like really trying to think about it. Like, yes, you are suffering right at this moment, but if you can, and it's so hard to do it, hard, but if you can take a step back and think about it from that different perspective, then maybe then you can start to see sort of the system in place, and it's not just specifically there to isolate, to and to punish, quote unquote, you.
Right, exactly. Like I always say, like, you are so important, but you're also not that important.
I love when you say that, actually. I've heard you say that many times, and I love it. Yeah.
And that's what I mean. But like, we have our individual relationship with something, and then we also have like the whole system, and how, like you said, like, and how the system is affecting us and playing out in our lives. And sometimes we love it, and sometimes, you know, we don't love it so much. I also think that our response to, you know, a feeling versus a fact will be different. Meaning, how we're feeling, if we feel like very like victimized by a certain, you know, observance, or we feel just very like restricted, whatever it is. So, okay, if we feel that, so we can feel the feeling and release the feeling, versus if this is actually a truth, if this is a fact that our behavior is somehow contributing to a specific reality for us, well, then feeling the truth isn't going to do it. Then we're actually demanding that, you know, we would say like, oh, you have to actually change what you're doing in order to get a different result. And that's not the reality with something like infertility or loss, etc. It is not it's not the result of anything that you're doing. So it's also kind of important to have that distinction for yourself, because how you'll respond to it will be different, and one response will actually be helpful in processing your feelings, and the other response will just have you hitting the same brick wall over and over and over again.
And I would just want to, for 5 seconds, just talk about the processing of the feeling.
Yeah.
Because I've spoken about on this page, and also Rachel Tuchman has spoken about a lot about toxic positivity, and not feeling the feeling and just saying, oh, it's fine, oh, it's what Hashem wants, oh, it's like, you can acknowledge the pain. You can
Right.
acknowledge the suffering. You can acknowledge that it's hard. It's okay. That
Right.
doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. I mean, and everyone makes that decision, right? You can, just because it's hard doesn't mean that it's something that shouldn't be done.
Right.
And also, just because it's hard doesn't mean that you can't acknowledge that it's hard. Acknowledging that it's hard, acknowledging pain, acknowledging suffering is good, and it's important for the processing of emotions and feeling in order to be able to move through those emotions.
100%.
So I just wanted to put that point out there also.
Yeah. And I always think it's so interesting because we somehow, like, we have this narrative of, you know, the fact, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, you're talking about the pain. We have this narrative of like, there's some, so we heal through the pain, or like we somehow benefit or like earn schar, even though like I don't love that language, from pain. But at the same time, we also for some reason think that expressing our pain is like a lack of, like, it shows a lack of faith. And I'm like, how can we have that? No, it doesn't make any, it doesn't make any sense. Either you're saying that, like, you know, we're supposed to feel pain for, like, you know, or you can say, you can't say both of those things, and somehow they both like get like a lot of airtime. And I don't know, I just think it's unnecessary. I see somebody's here. Oh, how Tuma is a loss.
Right, and how every month we lose the potential for life.
So anytime, so Tuma, we will always see some form of Tuma around a loss of life or a loss of potential life. The source, the like Av HaTuma, the source of all Tuma is actually a corpse. It's the most intense form of Tuma possible. So, and that really speaks to our how highly we hold just life in general, the potential for life. And it's not a punishment as much as it's something that like deserves like and requires acknowledgement. It requires us to pause, right? So and that pause is Tuma. And then when we have Tuma, we have the process of
lost you for a second. Here you're back. Okay. Shevi, let me just stop you for 1 second. I know. Shevi. I know, I'm working. Shevi, you're fuzzy and I can't hear you. Can you move a little bit? I'm working on it, guys. I'm working on it. Hold on. I might be something about your connection. I just lost the last like minute of you. I see you and you're very fuzzy. I hear you, but many people can't hear you, and your picture is very, very fuzzy. You want to stand up and maybe move and see if it gets better? Guys, just hold on 1 second.
I can't really do that.
Or you know what? Actually, maybe just. Okay, you know what? Maybe just, can you take the phone and move to a different part of the room?
Yeah, let me try this.
Okay. Okay, guys.
Is that better?
Do
you hear me better?
No. It's funny. I can hear you, but I think other people in the room can. Other people in the room.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, you know what? Maybe we'll. Can you guys? Because she's very fuzzy for me. Hold on. She's very fuzzy for me. Okay. Let's.
Amy, this is why I don't do lives. I'm stressing out.
Shevi, what you need to do is get back in your car. Clearly, that's clearly.
I don't have these issues in my car. Okay.
Okay. They can hear you now. Okay, we're good.
Okay, great.
Okay, go back.
Okay, amazing. So there is that potential loss of the marking of a potential loss of life, but I just wanted to say, for accuracy's sake, that even if there is no potential loss of life, you may sometimes find yourself in a state of tuma. You know, so like that's just, again, going back to the motivation behind something, and then also the practical halachic expression of it, that let's say postpartum, when you actually just gave birth, right, there's no loss of life, there's an actual life, and then you're still in a state of tuma, etc. So that's just for clarity's sake. I don't want to misrepresent like the halachic. Yeah. Okay. Was there something else? I think there was one more thing.
Correct. Okay. One last point. We wanted to talk about harchakos.
Oh, this was my favorite one. Okay. So
exactly.
Yay, we got here. Okay, thank you. You're such a good prompter. So harchakos, I always call them like the underdog.
I got my stuff. It's all good.
This is why you made it through medical school, okay? So I was
yes, my scribble of my chicken scratch. Yes. Oh, Shevi, you're breaking up again. Oh no, you're breaking up again. Okay, all good. Let's see, you're breaking up. Hold on. Okay, let's start talking and let's see if we can still hear you.
Okay, hopefully it just goes. Okay, so harchakos, I consider the underdog of taharas hamishpacha. And I think that the reason, and I love the underdog, like I just have to always like, you know, defend the underdog. No, can't hear. No.
Can't hear.
No.
Okay. All right, so this is what we're going to do.
Okay, I can go to a different part of my house. I just need like a minute.
Okay, fine. So let's end. Let's okay. Oh no, now you can hear.
Now we can hear. Okay, fine. So let me just try and get this out quickly, and even if you can hear now, hopefully you'll be able to hear it on the playback. Okay. So harchakos, I think, and I'm not alone in this, so don't worry, this isn't like Torah's Shevi, okay? It's really a disservice when we present them as a geder exclusively. Now, I'm going to be geder meaning yeah, hey, my battery's getting low. Maybe that's why. Okay. Geder meaning that it's like a fence around another restriction. We see harchakos as if intercourse is the Isser D'Oraisa, meaning that it is like what's prohibited from the Torah. Right. And then we have other oral laws, right? So those oral laws will be are kind of like protected by all of these, right? And the most famous one is not passing, right? So what I'll hear very, very often is, well, you know, handing my husband the car keys, like we're too mature adults, okay? We're not gonna like all of a sudden like not make it wherever we're supposed to go because we hand each other the car keys. Ooh, okay. No. Right. Now, aside from the fact that that's 100% true, we are talking about too mature adults. Having that perspective is really a disservice because A, it allows us to completely disregard harchakos, and it gives us that opening to say like, who cares? They're not important. They're just silly. And when you think that one part of halacha is silly, you know, then that opens the door to think that other parts of halacha are silly, right? And that's just like, that's unfortunate. And the other thing is that having that perspective does not give us the opportunity to actually use harchakos for what they are for. Now, this is a much longer conversation. It's usually like a two-part shear, okay? But I'll just give you kind of briefly, harchakos have a lot more to do with maximizing the parts of our relationship that are not in and of themselves physical or even sexual, right? And putting the spotlight on them. Now, human nature is that we appreciate and we value what we don't always have access to, right? And the potential for intimacy in the most mundane moments throughout your marriage is really what we're trying to kind of like preserve and hold on to. Actually, Dr. John Gottman, if anybody hasn't read his books, go get them. Like, why are you listening to me? Go read his books, okay?
Okay, no, they should listen to you too. Okay, keep going.
You can give out. Okay. But he actually, one of the pieces of data that he was able to, that he uncovered in his 40-year study of relationships is that couples who express the greatest degree of satisfaction over the course of a long-term relationship relationship were couples who had rituals and just daily interactions, habits, and how they interacted with each other that were non-physical or non-sexual. And that's really like the potential for harchakos, to kind of create that in your relationship. The smallest little thing, right, is like I always say, if your husband comes and he, brings you a cup of coffee in bed and he hands it to you and he's like, here, I made this for you. You're like, wow, right? Whereas if John, the barista, gives you a cup of coffee, I mean, if it's your first coffee of the day, then like I totally understand that reaction. But in general, we're not like, will you run away with me? Right? It's just not, because the potential for intimacy is not there. That's briefly an intro to how I would present harchakos. So I think that when we become overly dismissive, and I understand a certain degree of like, please, and it's human nature, but I just would want to encourage people to clarify the purpose of different areas of halacha before we become like overly flippant and overly dismissive of their observance. So yeah, at a time when you don't have access to physical connection, the fact that harchakos will make you feel even more disconnected, it's normal. It's normal, but that's also a signal to you that these are areas of your relationship that maybe do need some love and attention, so that when you are able to resume that physical interaction, it has a deeper foundation. It is more meaningful because it's rooted in, it's rooted in something else. Something pops into my head and then popped out.
Okay, I mean, I'm good, but like I'm not that good, so I'm not sure that I haven't been granted powers to read minds yet. I think that's kind of like Hashem's territory.
I feel like it's coming. It's coming, Amy. You're gonna get there.
Okay, I'm pulling. Cheesecake. Should we talk about cheesecake?
Oh my gosh. You know that I'm always game for talking about cheesecake.
I know. So I'm thinking if I get your mind off of it, maybe it'll come back.
I'm trying to remember, was it related to like harchakos specifically, or halacha, or I'm not sure.
You know what? Okay, here's what I'm going to say. I mean, we're at about the 40-minute mark, and we promised it was going to be at about the 30-ish minute mark.
Right.
And so this is what I'm going to say. I think that you've given over an incredible amount of inspiration and chizuk to me personally, and also to anyone who's listening and who will be listening. And this is obviously going to spark many more discussions. So I think that, look, let's continue to have that conversation on your page and on my page. Let people listen, let people reflect. If they want a second live, we can do that. I think you cut out again at this point, Shevi, because I don't see you blinking. But if people want a second live and you want to submit questions to either myself or Shevi, we will do that. But right now, I think we're going to end here. And I thank all of you for being here. I thank Shevi for being here. And we will continue.